Welcome to Multiple Perspectives. I'm David Lofgren. When it comes to navigating the early years of your personal finance journey, it can be overwhelming at many steps of the process. When you sit down to calculate your net worth for the first time, knowing that your student loans will have a significant impact on the equation. When you decide to start investing in the stock market, hoping that you know enough to make a good return on the precious dollars that you're investing. It's easy to put off taking control of your personal finances because the decisions just seem too big. My guest today has made it through each of these moments by choosing to approach them the only way we can, one step at a time. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Jordan Frey to the show. Jordan is a plastic surgeon and financial educator who began his financial independence journey by realizing that his net worth was in the red over $500,000. Yet, he achieved financial independence through disciplined financial strategies and a focus on alternative investments like real estate. As the founder of the Prudent Plastic Surgeon and author of the book Money Matters in Medicine, Jordan has helped countless professionals redefine their approach to wealth, breaking free from societal norms and empowering them to build financial freedom. Jordan, welcome to Multiple Perspectives.
Thanks so much for having me, David. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So you wrote a book, Money Matters in Medicine. Fascinating read. And, in it, there's a moment where you're sort of discussing your path to the beginning of trying to figure out your finances. And you sort of described this moment where you first checked your net worth to see where you stood and realized I'm in over my head over $500,000. Yeah. Can you just talk about what the specific event or the realization was that led you to that moment to decide you need to just sort of confront this reality, and then, what you decided to do about it in the early days?
Yeah, I remember it so clearly because to me it's definitely like a defining sort of period of my time. So I was at the end of my medical training. So I'd finished medical school. I was in a 6-year plastic surgery training program. And then I was also doing an extra year of fellowship. So I was in the middle, towards the end of my 7 years of training, and I was burned out, which I was like, man, this is pretty early on to be burned out, and it took me a while. It took me a couple of years to really, I think, come to terms that was what I was experiencing, but then also identify what was a big root cause, which for me was just a lack of financial well-being. So again, I was at the end of this training and really everyone was telling me, oh, you're almost there. This is everything you worked for. It's going to be fantastic. Everything's going to be great. And in my head, I was just going no, you don't understand. It's not. I have $500,000 of student debt. I have credit card debt. I have no savings, no investments. I don't know how to go about that. I have 2 young kids. I'm married, I have family support. And yes, I'm going to be graduating soon and becoming and attending a full-fledged doctor. And my salary is going to go up, but everyone's just telling me all the things I need to buy in order to meet this image of being a doctor. And it seems like my expenses are just going to increase way faster than my income. And I don't see a way out of this kind of hamster wheel. And that was really stressing me out. And that was a huge reason for my burnout. And I was kind of bitter at medicine because I'd spent, at this point, about 11 years after undergraduate training, the kind of the prime of your life, with this kind of, I'm not saying false narrative, but this idea that, oh, when you get to the end, it'll just all be worth it automatically. And I was kind of realizing no, it's not just going to happen. You have to make it happen. So anyway, with all of that, I kind of, with my wife, sat and we were like, we need to learn about personal finance. I just actively ignored finances my whole life because I never had any education in it. And that it's just kind of what you do. You don't really learn about it a lot. And we just developed these kind of consumeristic habits and just assume that that's the way. And so we sat and said, we need to learn about this. We started reading some blogs, reading books and things like that. And at that point, I learned about like what net worth was. And so that's when we sat and we calculated our net worth just using like an online calculator. And the thing I remember is just being really scared of what number was going to spit out because I knew it was going to be bad. But again, to that point, I had like actively ignored finances. I knew I had all these student loans. Every year I just kind of like closed my eyes and deferred them another year and was like, I'll deal with that at some point. And now the time was here. So we put everything in and my net worth was like roughly negative $550,000. So it was bad. It was not
That's
good.
scary.
But I honestly, upon seeing that, I did have that moment of my stomach drop, like, yikes. But I also started to feel really empowered too, because I sort of was finally starting to understand, and the net worth calculation really lays it out for you. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically just like all of your assets and all of your liabilities. And then your net worth is just your assets minus your liabilities. So it was really easy for me to just look at this and go, okay, here are my assets. There's not many, but here are things I can start doing to build up this column. And then I could look at my liabilities and go, yeah, there's a lot of liabilities. But if I start working to eliminate them, now that I've identified them, I can start building my net worth and it's going to start becoming more and more positive. And for me, that was really an eye opener and like, okay, now I kind of know the rules of the game, so I can sort of start playing the game. And again, at that point, I was still in training. So I was making not very much money. I was living in New York City, so it was very expensive. I still had all the loans. I still had the debt. But what happened, what changed in that time in my situation was my wife and I, based on calculating out this net worth, we wrote a written financial plan of just saying, these are our financial goals. This is what we're going to do in order to get out of debt, in order to start building investments and things like that. And at that point, it set out a course that we would reach financial freedom in 20 years, which again, up until that point, financial freedom was really a foreign concept to me. But it was 20 years because it was just, we're going to pay down our debt, we're going to build up. And it was very conservative. But even just going, okay, there's a path out of this, which I didn't even see before. That to me was such a like relieving thing and also an epiphany. And that truly did help me to alleviate the burnout that I was experiencing and refocus on why I love medicine to begin with. And so it was a huge epiphany for me. And now fast forward, and I'm in my 5th year after graduating training, and we are basically at the cusp of financial freedom. Again, we're still working and getting more and more because, as you go, you go, okay, well, now I want financial freedom while maintaining the current lifestyle I have and everything like that. So, but it's been a huge turnaround, and it's just been a real validation, I think, of the kind of hard work we've put in, and also, and we can always talk more about this, but I think about focusing, on what money is really important for, which is just a reflection of your values. And that for me was a big thing because I felt like I felt like I had to meet a certain standard as a plastic surgeon, as a physician, that was maybe put more on me by society than on what was important for me myself.
Right. I was going to ask about that. Like, is there, I think for some people having to postpone whatever, buying the Porsche or the nice house or something is like a much, there's a lot more friction there for some people than others. Did you find that, going into medicine that you had sort of set yourself up with these expectations of like, okay, I'm going to get out of residency and like, boom, I'm going to be able to achieve all of these things? Or is there part of sort of your value set or the way that you think about these things that it wasn't as hard? Like, where do you fit on that spectrum of how difficult is it to actually make that choice to pivot and say, the budget is written now, I have to stick to it?
For me, it was, everyone is a little bit different. I think, so initially it was really tough for me because you think like, this is just what you do. You see, we live in America, it's a very consumer driven place. And you see colleagues, etc., graduating and again, buying the Porsche, and you're always trying to keep up with the Joneses. What you don't always understand is that the Joneses may be deeply in debt and are working paycheck to paycheck and things like that. And so for me, I think once I realized that stuff, it became a lot easier. That, like, again, do I have like the fanciest car or something like that? No, but I could stop working if I wanted to, or, I can control my schedule as much as I want to. And I'm still full-time in medicine and I love what I do, but just having that freedom of ability is a huge, I think, mental thing and mindset shift. But I think also it's all about just being intentional with what you spend. And I always give this particular example, that, like, when I was graduating training, and my wife and I, we created a budget for what our salaries were going to be and stuff like that. And I had set out like a big amount, like $1,000, $1,500 a month to lease a luxury car. And I was just like, I had that in my plan for a long time. And I just kind of was thinking more and more, and I was like, I've never been a car person. I don't derive a huge amount of pleasure from that. I kind of just look for something to get me to point A to point B safely. And so why am I going to be spending all that money on this? It just doesn't really line up. And so I ended up, instead of doing that, I bought like a used Toyota for $4,000. I still drive it to this day, which is fine. We're actually saving up to buy a new car because that was in our plan. We said, every 3 years after graduating, we were going to buy my wife's car, which we did. And now 3 years after that, so a year from now, we're planning to buy a new car, which my wife is going to take, and then I'll take her old car. But anyway, so I still drive it up to this point, and it's great. I love it because it gets me where I want to go. And I know that every month now I have that extra money to either invest and progress on the path to financial freedom, or to spend on something else that actually does bring me that amount of joy. But on the converse side, because people usually think I'm saying, well, you have to be really frugal and stuff like that. And I'm not even quite saying that, because, like, again, coming out of training, one thing that was really important to us was the house we were going to live in, because I was in a small apartment in New York City. We had 2 kids. Our kids were in the bedroom. My wife slept on the couch. I slept on an air mattress for 6 months. Like, we were like, when we get out, we want space. We want rooms for everyone. We want a yard. We had a dog. We want a yard that's fenced in for our dog. So we bought, a stereotypical doctor house. And that mortgage is still the most expensive payment we have every month. But it's worth it to us. We get a greater amount of joy from the house than we do from that payment. And we also pay extra to the mortgage every month and stuff like that. So we are, trying to minimize our liabilities. But I'm not saying don't buy anything. It's just spend it intentionally. Spend it according to your values, not on what you think other people think you have to have. That's what I learned. And I've become very comfortable with that. I think in the beginning, it always feels it almost can feel a little awkward, like if you're not quite following what everyone thinks you should be following, or the way people think you should be spending your money. But you just have to be comfortable knowing these are my values, this is what I'm doing, and I'm building towards something greater, which is, again, the freedom that money can buy.
Right. Well, and I imagine that, like, when you're driving your $4,000 Toyota, knowing that you paid for that car in its entirety with the amount of money that you would have paid for maybe 2 months, 2.5 months of leasing the car that you had imagined. I mean, that's going to feel pretty good too. And maybe a different kind of good feeling, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No car payment. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, so much of what you're talking about stems from the fact that you actually took the time to sit down and write the budget. And I imagine, went through a process of doing some sort of self-education, that you and your wife had to take the time to figure out, okay, what's the book that I should read? What's who are the people I need to talk to try and create some sort of framing for this? Isn't that just a lot to take on? I mean, you're in the middle of residency. I've seen elsewhere, you're, sort of talking about how, like, you were doing your residency, your wife was getting her PhD, you guys, you started a young family. It's like you have a lot on your plate. what do you say to folks who just feel like, man, one more thing is not possible right now? Taking especially something as hard as taking a long, hard look at the finances you've been avoiding for the last 10 years,
Yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons that I know I took so long to look at it and confront it. And I think most people are similar because it feels very daunting. And basically the way I did it, and it's very similar to how I've kind of devoured big things in the past. But I just tried to microdose it. So like what we did was we bought 2 copies of the first kind of personal finance book we read was The Millionaire Next Door, which is kind of a classic. And we had 2 copies, and we just said we were each going to try to read 10 pages a night. So, kind of before going to bed, we would sit and we would just read 10 pages. Sometimes we would end up reading more because we were just really into it. Other times we probably read less because we were just beat, but that was kind of the average we set for. And then I additionally said, I'm going to subscribe to a personal finance blog, and I'm going to read 1 blog post a day, one that gets emailed to you. So overall, those 2 things probably took like 15 to 20 minutes of our day. So it wasn't a lot, but over the course of a month and then 2 months of sticking with that, all of a sudden you start going like, okay, I'm really starting to understand this and get this. And that's when, we would we would read it together and we'd go, okay, like we need to figure out what our expenses are. So we need to sit with our bank account and go through, okay, how much are we spending each month? And that's kind of the precursor to like a budget. So those things just kind of naturally come out of it. So it's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen. And I mean, there's things still to this day, 5 years later, that we're still doing and learning and looking to improve on. So it's a constant process. Not something that's just going to happen overnight. You just have to start somewhere. And if you start going like, okay, I'm going to read this entire book and I'm going to come up with a financial plan tomorrow and it's all going to be done in a week, you're going to set yourself up for failure because it's just going to be so overwhelming that you're going to just, succumb to analysis paralysis or just intimidation that you won't start. So that's always my recommendation to people is like choose one book, choose one blog, read 5 to 10 pages a day, read a post a day, and then kind of build off of that.
Yeah, sure. Make the big goal something that's easily digestible by breaking it down into sub goals. Classic successful people sort of, how do you get this big thing done? One step at a time.
One step at a time, exactly. And there's very research, but the one I always come back to is like it takes 66 days to make a habit. So anything you do, you have to make it small enough that you'll do it for 66 days. It's the same thing like working out, which I'm notoriously really bad at. But like if you say, okay, I'm going to do some massive workout every day, like you're never going to keep that up for 66 days. You have to do something that's manageable.
Right. Yeah, my brother always says, I just try and go to the gym and tell myself, even if all I do is sit in the sauna, it's a successful gym day.
You into the gym. Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm all about that.
Yeah. So do you have any tips for folks who are trying to figure out how to sort of shift their vision of what success looks like in the early sort of post-school, post-residency? And I suppose this can translate to many working professionals who have, they've dedicated a lot of time to getting into this career. How do you start to just sort of talk yourself through that feeling of, okay, what is success going to look like to me? How can I maybe shift my mindset?
I think that's the most important thing is even just asking yourself that question, because I think a lot of people don't. And I know I didn't for so long. I mean, I thought I did, but when you actually break it down, you realize at a certain point, I think I kind of just want this because I think that's what people think I should want, or this is just sort of what I've seen other people do or something like that. And so that for me was a really challenging thing to break out of. It took a lot of, and this is not always the kind of person I am, or I was, I guess I'd become more like it, but just writing down like something as simple as, like I always call it the big why. When I talk to people who say they want to reach financial freedom and stuff, I think you need to have a why for that. And and you need to have a why for any goal that you have. So that's what I did, is I looked at the goals that I had for myself at this point, early on when I was, struggling with this. And I would say, okay, what is my why for that goal? And if I couldn't think up a really good why beyond just because, then I realized that that wasn't a goal that was so important to me. And after doing that, there was a point where I was like, oh my God, like, why the hell am I doing this? Because I sort of, the goals I had, I realized I didn't have a good why for them. And so that can be really distressing. And you have to think, okay, what is the reason I am doing it? And really define that. And I honestly, I wrote it out, and, put it on paper, and, what are my passions? What are the goals that I want? Why am I doing all of this? And you really just want to simplify things. And again, remember, it does not, there's nobody you can disappoint except yourself. I think we always worry about, well, what will my family think? What will my friends think? What will my colleagues think? Ultimately, the people that are important to you, they just want you to be happy. Anyone that judges based on you doing something that is ultimately going to make you happy and places some judgment on that is not someone who's supporting you in the path towards your happiness. And that's a whole separate conversation of, should that person be involved in your life or not? So it's really just, it's so personal. And once you start doing that, it is so freeing, because you don't have to worry about all these other goalposts that you've arbitrarily kind of set or have externally been set for you. So that's my biggest recommendation, is think about why you're doing anything, and you have to have a really good personal reason for it. That's what helped me the most.
Words to live by. I want to shift gears a little bit, because I want to understand a bit more about how you actually think about investing, like how you actually think about, the sort of, not just the why, but also the what and the how of, this path towards financial independence. In your book, you write about how you were, and maybe this is you're still in the midst of this, but, so trying to overcome the debt that you have incurred through school while simultaneously investing for the future. And, there's some models where people say, like, you have to get rid of all of your debt before you can think about investing a dollar. But it seems like you have this sort of approach to trying to do more than one thing at once. And I'm curious just if you have any sort of like steps or frameworks that you would recommend to people, or if you could just sort of explain how you think about trying to accomplish multiple goals at the same time, financially speaking.
Yeah, that was, for me, again, looking at the net worth when I calculated it out and seeing how negative it was, I kind of identified two things initially, I'll say, to make things better. One, I had to start getting rid of my debt. Two, I had to start building investments or assets. And so debt was always an important part of it. I could list out based on how high an interest of debt I had, but I kind of listed it out like that. And the highest was credit card debt. And so it was, okay, I'm going to start paying that off so that, I'm not just doing the minimum. I'm not accruing more debt. I need to start paying it off more aggressively. So I knew I had to figure out a plan for that. And then it came the time of, okay, how am I going to build assets? And so I had to start learning about how to invest, which again seems really intimidating. It's once you break it down, and again, you start learning and reading these books and following the right blogs and stuff like that, it's not that complicated. But the ways I set on investing and building assets was, I was going to invest in index funds. So I was going to invest in the overall market passively, which, to me, that is the right way, and that the I don't want to pass judgment or whatever, but the smartest way to invest and be active investing in general 80% of the time, lower taxes, lower fees. So I wanted to do that. But then as I learned a little bit more, I also wanted to get a little bit more aggressive in terms of building my wealth and building cash flow and alternative streams of income. So that's where real estate came into the picture. And so basically I had these three avenues of where I wanted my money and my savings to go. One was paying off debt. One was, index fund investing in stocks and bonds, and one was real estate. So we just kind of said, my wife and I, like, all right, we're going to take our savings rate. So the savings that we have every month, and a third of it we're going to use to pay off debt. A third of it we're going to invest in the market, and a third of it we're going to put towards saving and investing in real estate. And so that's the way that we kind of did it. I think everyone, you can come up with your own percentages and stuff like that. But I think it is important to have some variety where you feel like you're gaining on multiple fronts. Because if you're just paying off debt, and I know people who have done that, and I think getting out of debt is an extremely important thing. And I talk mainly to doctors, but to people in general with student loans, I think you want to try and get out of debt within 5 to 10 years of finishing your ultimate education, whatever level that's at. So as long as you're on that pace, though, I don't think you necessarily need to go so crazy that you're like, I'm going to pay it off in a year or something like that at the expense of investing. So you can figure out that balance for yourself. But that's kind of how we did it. And then as the debt decreased to now where we don't have any more student debt that we're paying off, the only debt we're paying off is our personal home mortgage, then you start putting more and more towards those investing buckets.
Is there, do you think of this sort of trade-off between paying off debt and investing, whether it's in public markets or, in hard assets? Is there a way that you think about this beyond? You can do the cold hard calculation, right? Figure out what's your interest rate on your student loan, what's the interest rate on your mortgage, what's the potential return on an investment. You can try and sort of game the system that way, looking at the numbers. But there are also emotional components, right? And I think, as you've mentioned, a lot of the stuff around finance is not just math. It's also how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the decisions we're making. Is there a way that you think about balancing those things, the satisfaction of paying down a debt versus the excitement of getting into a new asset class or a new investment,
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're spot on. I think most success in personal finance comes down to like behavior rather than math. There's, for sure, I agree with that. I tend to be, and some of the criticism that I take is that I tended to be more conservative in terms of paying off debt, because people will go, okay, well, if your debt's at 5% and I can invest for 7%, the numbers say I should just invest my money. I'll get a better return. But the thing is, there's a few things on the kind of more like cold, hard, practical side. The return on your investment you get from paying off debt is guaranteed, right? If it's a 5% debt and you pay it off, that's a 5% return. No investment at all, even the safest, whatever bond, is a guaranteed return. So that's an advantage in the paying off debt side. But also debt is just, it's a drain on your spirit. You feel it. It's a monkey on your back. And getting out of debt, I've never met anyone that was disappointed. So that's why I tended to be more aggressive about paying that off, and generally will steer people towards that or tell them that's how I feel. The thing you realize too, as you get more and more into this, is there is a bit of a difference between like net worth and your wealth. Because net worth is a measurement, right? And all measurements are somewhat imperfect. So net worth is probably the best measurement of your wealth, but it's not necessarily like cash flow or financial freedom. Really, like Robert Kiyosaki, who, he's a famous author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says wealth is how long you can last without needing to work, right? And so, the more debt you have, that's the more payments you need to make every month. So that's more cash you have to have come in every month. So a lot of people, you start to realize, well, if I just got rid of all my debt, my car loan, my home mortgage, my student loans, if I didn't have those, how much money would I actually need to live? And you start going, oh, well, I actually wouldn't need to work that much if I only needed that much money to live because all of my debt was gone. So that's when you start going, okay, getting rid of debt, it can be a really powerful and important thing. So though that's my kind of rationale or how I think about it. I would say one of the worst pieces of advice is that I got financially before I actually started my financial education was I had one doctor friend tell me, like, I'm going to die with my student loans. And initially I was like, yeah, that'll show them that really sticks it to the loan company or something. And then you realize, like, wait, that's the opposite. If you are the loan company, you want people to hold on to those loans as long as possible, because that means they're paying much more than the initial amount of the loan based on interest. And if you're the loan company, the thing you don't want them to do is to pay back that loan as quickly as possible, because then you make as little interest on it as possible. So again, the shorter you can have your loans, the sooner you can pay off debt, the better. But you also need to be reasonable about it. I'm not telling people go live in poverty so you can pay your loans off in 2 years instead of 5 years or something. Get yourself on track that you're going to be able to pay your loans off within a reasonable amount of time, which I think is 5 to 10 years. And once you're on that track, then you can have some flexibility. And if you have stuff left over, use it to invest and yes, take advantage of maybe some potentially higher returns.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I've definitely heard people say that thing that, like, oh, I'll always have this debt, just sort of toss it away. Maybe emotionally that's a helpful thing to just sort of be able to say, I just never want to have to think about this.
Yeah, exactly.
But the math doesn't really work out, as you say.
It doesn't work out. And I think people just start to think, well, this is the norm. This is just how it is. But it really doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Real estate is a part of your investment portfolio, and you've talked elsewhere about sort of how you've approached investing in real estate to kind of supercharge your wealth building process. Obviously, Equity Multiple as a commercial real estate investing platform, it's something that we're particularly interested in. I'm curious if you could just talk about the way that you sort of started to look at real estate, what your entry point was for real estate as an investment, and where does it sit now as far as your portfolio construction? How do you think of it now that you're a few years in?
Yeah. So my interest in real estate started basically as I was transitioning from training to being, like a full-fledged, full-time attending physician. And I was just reading more and more of this stuff. And I had taken an interest to this personal finance stuff. I saw how it improved me, personally, professionally, and stuff like that. And I was reading a lot about people investing in real estate. And I was just like, yeah, this, seems like it works. I get it. I see why it works, and why it makes sense. And so again, I went to my wife, we do everything together. And I was like, I think we should start investing in real estate. And she was just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, we just moved to a new city. We just got a house. We still are working on paying off debt, all this stuff. How is getting into more debt with real estate, if we're buying our own properties and using a mortgage, how is that actually increasing our wealth, all this stuff? So same as before, we ended up educating ourselves. I think a fantastic book to read. I mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's a great philosophical one. A great one if you want to understand how does real estate actually build wealth? How do the numbers work? Is The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller. I think that's a fantastic one. So we read about it and we were like, we get this, and I think let's do it. We started the first year, so this was in 2020. We bought a small duplex in Buffalo, New York, where we live. That we rented out, and that generated about $1,000 a month in cash flow. So after we had paid the mortgage, after we paid expenses and everything like that, there was $1,000 of cash flow. So it wasn't life-changing, but it was a proof of concept of okay, this works, we can do it. And so we started buying more and more properties, and we're now up to 8 properties and 18 units. And so that generates for us $10,000 of cash flow a month. which that is life-changing. And right now we still mainly use that $10,000 a month to just save up more money to buy more real estate and kind of create that snowball effect. But I've also used that money a lot to pay off a ton of my loans. And we've used it to even do some things like, add some renovations to our home and things like that. So it has been greatly life-changing. And that's a big part of what, as we build up, what we'll use to, cover our expenses when and if we do, fully retire, both of us. So it's been a big thing. And like I said, it started out in the beginning that a third of our savings went to paying off debt, a third to investing in the, public equities, and a third to real estate. Now, if you look at our net worth, about 80% of our net worth is real estate. And it also generates $10,000 of cash flow a month. So it all started out even, but this has now become a very big part of our wealth. And I still invest in stocks and, max out my retirement accounts and invest in a taxable account and everything like that. But real estate certainly has accelerated that path for us. So I do think it's a very reasonable, thing for people to invest in. Now, I know a lot of people don't always necessarily want to do it the way that we do, which is investing actively, meaning we own the properties. We actually self-manage. We've relatively automated that process and enjoy it. I guess it depends the day you ask me if I enjoy it or not. But overall, it's not too bad. But most people want to invest passively, and that's where I think like what you guys are doing at Equity Multiple is really beneficial, because you don't have that layer of needing to manage the property. You're not taking on the debt necessarily yourself and things like that. But no, real estate's been really powerful in our portfolio. So I think it's a very important part and something I encourage most people, once you kind of get beyond that basic, okay, I have a plan of paying off debt, I have a plan on maximizing my retirement accounts and stuff, this can be a really important part of your portfolio.
Sure. Now, as real estate investors, do you guys have, is there a certain profile of property that you're looking for? It sounds like you're not just investing in single family homes, but also in what we would consider a true commercial real estate, like multifamily investment, if you've got duplexes and such. Is there a certain sort of play that you're going for? Do you think of just trying to invest purely for cash flow, or is there some sort of value add approach that you're bringing in? Like, how do you think of yourself sort of as business people investing directly in commercial real estate?
Yeah, we've sort of found like a nice niche, and it's kind of a funny story. So when we started out in 2020, if you actually looked at like trade publications online and stuff, because we did, Buffalo, New York was listed as like the worst real estate rental market in the country. And we were just like, oh man, what do we do? We knew we were moving there. I'm from there originally. I like the idea of building up our community. And we kind of took a leap and said, you know what? We're going to try and do it, because we're there. Again, we want to, at least in the beginning, learn and be hands-on and everything like that. So we kind of found this niche that works, which is small multifamily properties that were sort of run by mom and pop landlords and were not necessarily run very well and could be, have minor to moderate rehab to increase their value and the rents they could get. And we rent to working families. And we've been able to build up and be very successful in that niche. And so that's kind of what we've done and what we're continuing to do. It is funny because in this past year, Buffalo was named the best real estate rental market in the country by, I forget the publication, but a major one. And so it's just kind of funny because those things are so capricious and go back and forth. So we've seen nice appreciation by that, which is just pure dumb luck. But yeah, so that's what we found. And we've struggled over the past years because we've gone like, do we want to scale? How do we do that? Should we be getting bigger properties, 20 unit properties, 100 unit properties? Should we be syndicating deals, et cetera? And you know what? In our market, that just up till now hasn't worked so well. And the niche we have just works really well. So that's kind of what we've stuck with. And that is a good lesson, I think, that, different markets are going to have different areas that work and don't work. Different people, different investors are going to find different strengths that they have and what type of investing works for them. And there's many right ways to do it. There's certainly wrong ways to do it, but there are many right ways that you can do it. And so find what works for you and stick with that. And whether that's a passive approach, an active approach, whether it's small multifamily, big multifamily, single family, et cetera. But that's kind of how we have defined ourselves as investors and what works for us. And certainly things can always evolve in the future, but that's where we're at now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you can look at these ratings that sort of will tell you, okay, this is good or bad place to invest. But I think the thing, and actually you have a blog to this effect, talking about sort of some of the red flags of syndications. One of the points that is brought up in that post is that local knowledge is so valuable when it comes to who is operating or who is sort of the sponsor for any given deal. Clearly, if you're from Buffalo, you returned there, you've got I guess what we would call in economics, an unfair advantage, right? That you
Exactly.
can understand this market with much more nuance than, say, some sort of regional or national player that's trying to come in and just make some big sweeping play in the real estate market there. So you probably are able to see how the dynamics on the ground, demand drivers and such, are actually shifting in a much more nuanced way than maybe most are, regardless of what the trade papers
1,000%.
say about Buffalo.
You're exactly right. I think that gives you an unfair advantage because knowing the market is so important. And I think especially if you're investing with someone else or investing passively, you want to work with someone who knows the market and has that unfair advantage. And to me, that's why I think the cool thing about real estate is that it is inefficient because there are those advantages still out there in the market. And I love learning about the stock market, but the stock market in this day and age is just so efficient that I personally don't think that anyone can exploit the inefficiencies enough to quote unquote beat the market. But in real estate, you can. And we've shown that, just investing in Buffalo, we've taken those inefficiencies, used them to our advantage, and we are getting, cash on cash returns that are big, are 15 to 20% and more than, what most are. And that's just because of the hard work that we're putting in and the work we've put towards exploiting those inefficiencies. And so that can still be done. And you want to find a real estate operator if you're investing with someone who knows how to exploit those inefficiencies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wonder, how far are you into your sort of financial independence journey right now?
So we're at a point where, we're 5 years in a temporal point, and then we're at the point where if we went on I hate to call it shoestring because it's not, but if we took just right where we are right now, we would be financially independent. We would basically just be scraping by. And I say scraping by, like sending our kids to private school and
Right.
living in our big house and stuff like that. So not,
Right.
I
It's
don't
all
mean that
relative.
in any sort of exactly. But we could right now if we wanted, but every month we would have to make sure we were sticking to our budget in order to cover our expenses. So that is a cool thing to really know. It doesn't quite feel like that because I want some cushion in there too. So we're within, a few years of sort of, I think where comfortably, if we wanted to, we could just stop working. My wife actually, in a way is experiencing that because she was a college professor. She 2 years ago decided that she was going to stop doing that. She had reached the goals that she wanted to there and also realized that just by focusing on real estate, she would be making a lot more money and also have total control of her time to, raise our family and do all the things on the side that she wants to do. So she's done that. I love operating. I love what I do. I don't have plans of scaling back or stopping at any point, but I also know I'm an employee. Things could change on a dime based on my employer, and having that freedom is really I don't know a better word than saying a freeing thing. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're 5 years in. It feels like you're you're right, at least right on the cusp, if not, in a place where you feel like, okay, technically we have achieved financial independence. This is possible here. But you're still working full time. You've gotten into stock, public markets investing. You are now deep into the real estate investing world. You have some entrepreneurial endeavors, Prudent Plastic Surgeon amongst them. You've sort of built your own micro media empire. You've got a podcast. You've published a book. You founded a website, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what's next? I mean, where do you go from here? Do you feel like now that you've expanded in a variety of ways, it's just about sort of like refining the things that you're doing right now, or do you have your eye on some sort of is there a new play that is stirring your mind?
No, that's kind of where, there's always the things we're looking to expand to, but I'm, now I really love like where my practice is at. I really love on the entrepreneurial side where the Prudent Plastic Surgeon, which is, my website and blog and kind of the hub of everything is. I'm looking more and more into how to expand that. And I think, trying to provide more personal access to people as much as possible within my time limits. And so how to do that, whether that's conferences or coaching and stuff like that, but really just refining and building that out. And I always have enjoyed writing. So, I love writing and that's always going to be the primary modality. And then real estate, we're really just kind of building our portfolio. We're at the point where we have a lot of people asking, and like want to invest with us. And we're just not at the point of doing that yet. And so that's where having, partners like Equity Multiple and stuff is so helpful. Places that are doing it the right way. So, it's just kind of about refining what we're doing and looking for those next places to expand. But I'm really happy with where I'm at and enjoying what I'm doing. And so that's kind of what it's all about.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for your time today. Really awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I enjoy chatting with you and love your podcast and listen to all the episodes.
Oh, thanks, man. That's it for this episode of Multiple Perspectives. If you'd like to hear more from Dr. Frey, you can read his blog at prudentplasticsurgeon.com. He's also got a podcast that I can't recommend enough called Finance Flash Go, where he breaks down a different finance concept every episode in less than 10 minutes. Most of them are like 3 to 5 minutes long. And it's really great for getting a little micro dose of learning into your busy schedule. If you want to learn more about commercial real estate investing with Equity Multiple, our podcast, blog, and white papers are always available at equitymultiple.com. You can find links to all of those things in the show notes, along with a host of other resources. I'm David Lofgren. Thanks again so much for listening. I'll be back in your feed real soon with another episode of Multiple Perspectives from Equity Multiple. In the meantime, drop me a line. Let me know what you think of the show. You can reach me at multipleperspectives@equitymultiple.com. See you next time.